Good, still afternoon. It's morning somewhere. Anyway, how are you guys today? I think most everybody came back from lunch. One of the things I heard this morning were a bunch of great things about the progress that other people have been making. And so some of the things you're going to hear today are going to echo some of the things you heard earlier today. I think I've tried to wrap it up into one package. So we'll see how that goes. Mostly what I'm going to talk about is what's going on with Gen 4 consoles and how they're reacting to the world that we've been living in. So let's get started. One of the things that's happened is we've had an industry that's had absolutely no change over the last several years. It's been exactly the same. The only things that really mattered that have changed at all is that where people have played games has changed, how they play those games, how long they play those games, how much they pay for those games, and who builds it. But other than that, everything else in the industry is the same. If you talk to people who have played console games in the past, and one of the gifts you get for being in the industry for 30 years is you can find somebody who played a Genesis game 25 years ago and ask him why he's not playing anymore. And generally it comes down to these three things. We've asked for too much time, we've asked for too much skill, and we've asked for too much money, at least all at once. And so the console business has really suffered from this. And as a result, the other businesses, the other great gaming businesses that have grown up over the last especially 5 years, have really reacted well to this. I think what we're going to see is in Gen 4 that increasingly those companies are going to respond to this. I think that our customers, especially the customers who are not console players today, really are looking for a single fabric of play. Generally, if somebody plays on a mobile device today or plays, who is not a traditional console player, they don't play 6 games at once. They usually play 1. And so what they care about is that game on the device that's in front of me today? They don't have a lot of allegiance to any particular platform. Usually they don't identify even the platform they have correctly. One of the things that we have noticed is that we are painfully aware that many of our mobile customers actually don't know the device that they own. And so it's very hard to have allegiance to a device you can't even identify. What they want is they want their game where they want it, when they want it as long as they can, and at a price that they can really defend to other people. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is something that got talked about earlier today, which is the idea of what I call gaming context and game granularity. One of the previous speakers talked about the Starbucks line analogy. I have my own version of that. We've had at EA for a couple of years. We'll talk more about that in a second. So this is an example. This is Lily, one of the people who works for me, a CMU graduate. And she's playing Plants vs. Zombies on a tablet. One of the things that's interesting about a tablet is the minute that you play a tablet product, you pick it up, you give me 2 hands. If you give me 2 hands, you give me 10 minutes. And so as a result, game granularity for tablet games ends up having to really be built around that idea. It can be shorter, but it probably can't be longer. And that has everything to do with not asking for too much of that player's time. Computer time tends to work a little different. This is Antonio, another CMU graduate. He's famous for his absolutely emotional reactions to games when he doesn't like how they come out. Generally, we find that computer games get played between 90 minutes and 2 hours at a slug. That's the granularity of that particular platform. And so in this particular case, it's about 2 hours, and that's what it provokes out of Antonio. He bites his lip. That's the best he can do. So anyway, console has a different foundation to it. Once I get your butt on a couch, I get 2 hours for sure. If I can get you to sit on a couch, consoles have been very good at getting 2 hours at a slug out of your time that way. Whether that should be true or not, it's interesting, and I think you're going to see an evolution of shorter times. In this particular case, a game of FIFA, about the shortest that people can play a full game is about 55 minutes. That game granularity means to me that I can't build the same game on every platform. That intrinsic borderline that sits around it means that I cannot build precisely Battlefield on every one of those platforms. We have seen some games that'll translate that, but they tend to be the exceptions. Golf is one of the very few that doesn't seem to care, but all of the rest of them really care a lot. And so one of the things we're going to need to consider as we try and talk to that other audience, as well as to bring that audience to Gen 4, is to think in terms of how they think about their time, because right now we still ask for too much. Mobile games have been played in some interesting places, and you might want to think about this the next time you borrow somebody's phone. This is one of those things that we don't have perfect telemetry. Maybe the NSA knows, but I am suspicious that a high number of games get played in bathrooms. So we count that as being a 90-second cycle. That is not something new. In our context, the analogy that we used was that the 30-foot putt in Tiger Woods golf on my phone is the most important thing in the world until the lady at the airline counter says next. And so that's really the world that those guys play in. We think that that's actually, in most of these cases, these are not new ideas. So there's another game form that was built around a 90-second cycle that everybody in this room has played. Anybody got an idea what it is? What? Angry Birds? Angry Birds would be a good one of these, but wasn't. Anybody got an idea? The primary coin-op cycle was 90 seconds. That's how you made money in the coin-op business. So in your head, if you want to run a mental exercise for whether a game is a good mobile game or not, try and imagine it as a coin-op, and would you pay a quarter to continue to play it? We don't make Angry Birds, but Angry Birds would have been a great coin-op, and might still be a great coin-op. So that's something to consider. We think that gameplay granularity is fundamental and has everything to do with respecting the player's time, which we think might be the most important of those three things in getting their attention. How they play has changed in some pretty fundamental ways, too. For the longest period of time, our friend Miyamoto taught every child how to play video games, and I thank him from the bottom of my heart. Most people who are in this room who have children who are over the age of 10 probably had their first gaming console was a DS or a Game Boy. And so again, I thank Miyamoto for that, but he's fallen down in the job. And I would say for the last 5 years, that job has been taken over by a dead guy from Cupertino. Increasingly, it has become not about this, but about other things. And so what we've noticed is a big trend. Any of you who has a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, you know what the primary gaming device is in their lives. And it isn't an Xbox, and it isn't a Wii, it's that. That makes some pretty fundamental differences. If I have only learned how to play games on a touch screen, when I hand you a 14-button controller, that's going to be an exciting time, because you are not ready for that. The good news is the console guys have actually thought about this, and in both cases, they've embraced the idea of what a piece of touch glass can do for their games. And so we're seeing very innovative controllers that are built on that. And let me talk about some of the reasons why I think that's important, in particular for managing the skill problem. First of all, it forces you to build a game that is simpler. It just does. I cannot build a 2-joystick, 14-button game on a controller. It's unworkable. But what you can also do with that controller is that controller can be a part of the process of teaching people how to play your game in a way that that 14-button controller can never be. In addition to labeling all the things that are there, something you can never have on a 14-button controller, it can also pay attention to how you're playing the game. It can notice when you're stuck. It can say, push this button now. We have to fundamentally embrace the process of teaching our players how to play our games. Yes, we need to make them simpler, but we need to be in the business of teaching them how to play them better. Finally, the biggest change has probably been, for the rest of the business, about how people pay. For the longest time, especially for the console business, our price points have been pretty fixed, and it hasn't really been our fault. For the most part, the fundamental business model that has been console up until now has been based on the notion of selling the hardware as a loss leader and then following that up with software that you make profit from. The bad news is if you're a retailer, that means there isn't much margin on that base machine, which means that the deal that those console manufacturers have struck over time with the big box retailers are, you take my machine and we will fill floor space that gives you the highest ROI of your particular store for the floor space that you give us. That is where the $60 price point came from, is trying to accomplish that ROI for that square footage for the average retailer. For the most part, that is breaking down. It isn't that that model won't exist, but digital distribution and all of these other platforms have really broken that dam, and the water is flowing around it now. We see from the console manufacturers that you will see a variety of models. You will see products that actually cost customers more and products that cost customers substantially less. We expect to see that flexibility on the next platform. In some cases, players aren't paying at all. And we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that in the console business. I'm not sure you'll ever see a straight free-to-play business on the console, at least this round, and at least not early on. But I think you're going to see some innovation around the edges of that. What I'm looking forward to in the console business is that those will be people who are proud about spending that money and will tell others. And that will help the free-to-play business model across the board. Finally, I believe this is the biggest change coming, and we've seen, again, some allusions to this today. I actually think this is further along than other people think it is. When I first got in this business, this was actually my going away party. Apple Cider Magazine came out with this ad in it, and this was the company I was going to work for, which before that party, everybody thought I was crazy, and then when they saw the magazine article, they thought I was cool, so it worked out for me. These are the first EA software artists. So here's my little test for me, see how good my memory is. But that's Mike Abbott at the top, Matt Alexander, Danny Button, who is the first member of the Video Game Hall of Fame, John Field, famous for making Axis Assassin and Last Gladiator, and famous for us not letting him make Whale Hunt. John Freeman and Ann Westfall, the creators of Archon. David Maynard, who created a game called Worms and has 3 children who are in this business. Maybe his most amazing product. And then finally, Bill Budge at the upper right-hand corner, who was the original software hero of the business. I'd make the case that increasingly these aren't the software artists that our customers are. And especially anybody who's been paying any attention to Minecraft, it's been taken, the lunatics have taken over the asylum in Minecraft. Minecraft is very much their game now and not Notch's anymore. And you see very interesting things like this. So somebody just did this because they wanted to, but the guys from Coca-Cola should have paid them, because the number of views they got is pretty outstanding for this. And I think you're going to increasingly see that in the open spaces that we create, where players will show up and add their marks, and in some cases they may have their own motivations, their own economic motivations for doing that. That's going to change our relationship with those customers in some pretty fundamental ways. So maybe these guys are the new software artists, and that's going to make them the new strategic resource for the future. If your games are being built by your customers with you, that means those first 5,000 users are probably as valuable as any of the developers on your team. And that having the right ones, the ones who are organized, the ones who understand how to give you feedback that is actually indicative of a large market, those guys are going to become strategic resources. And they know it. They're starting to create these organizations, and they are virulent about their status. In fact, these 2 guys use the same term, and you should see the fight on the forum between them. It's one of the funniest things on the web right now. So increasingly, we're going to have a relationship with these organizations to build great products, because they're going to be a part of the process. This is not going to be random individuals anymore. They're going to be organized, and they're going to want to participate in your process, not just in helping you build it, but maybe in monetizing it. This will be an interesting change in the business. And it's not new. For us, I had a discussion with somebody yesterday, and they said that Minecraft is a game that EA would never make. And I disagreed with them. And the reason why is because we've had a very similar product for a long time called The Sims. Most of the value for our customers for The Sims, especially Sims 3, over the last 2 years, has been created by our users. It's the stuff they've made, it's the movies they've made, it's the dollhouses that they've shared. To the greatest extent, this market has redefined, Minecraft has simply walked in our shoes. So we should be able to learn from this as fast as anybody, but so should you. So how are the console guys responding to this? These machines are about to come out in November, and I think it's a pretty tremendous opportunity for the business. They've had a few things. So I always think it's interesting to look at a console provider based on how they're spending their money. So for years, this has been kind of the profile of how memory has expanded over time on the platforms. But that actually belies something. In fact, this set of consoles adjusted for inflation are the cheapest launch consoles ever, even cheaper than the NES. And one of the reasons why is because they've spent less money on the memory that's in that machine than at any other time in the past. What that means is that they're spending less money on the hardware than the last launch, I would say net. What has been interesting is the other places they've been spending their money increasingly. Most of it's been showing up in system software, and in particular, network software. And that's a long-term trend. I think we should consider that as immutable at this point in time. Who in here bought a 360 when it came out? Do you remember what it looked like? I'll bet you don't. It's had 4 major operating system changes, including 2 major user interfaces. I actually booted one up at work the other day on a screen and didn't tell people what it was. And people who've been in the industry for 10 years did not recognize it. It was pre-Blades. There was an interface before Blades. People don't even remember that. So the underlying point here is the 360 as a machine has dramatically evolved over its period of time. I'm not even talking about Kinect. I'm just talking about the basic system software of the heart of the machine. We should expect that to happen on Gen 4. In fact, we should expect it to happen to such an extent in Gen 4 that maybe that Gen 4 is really the same as Gen 5. You will get the network software, if there is a Gen 5 piece of hardware, you will see all of its network software on Gen 4 first. All of that functionality, all of those additions will get added because they're not dependent on the hardware. They're sitting at the other end of the wire. And increasingly, that's where these guys are spending their money. So if you think the platform of the future is hardware, I'll bet not, just based on how these people are spending their money. So that means that maybe the platform of the future is the network side, not just the hardware side. That means if you're buying a Gen 4 piece of hardware this fall, which I hope all of you are, that in fact you're probably buying into the future of that platform beyond the time horizon that you can imagine. This is a profound change. We're no longer in step function, we're in evolution. We're not changing every 4 years, we're in continuous change. And I think that's a fundamental change to the way that the console business is going to work, and it lets them respond to those 4 big questions, which is, how do I play? How much skill do you ask for me? How do I pay? And where do I play? All of those things will change in fundamental ways and evolve on these new platforms because they can. So let's see how we think they're going to do. How are we doing at playing at the right time? I would say C+. Most console games and the variety of games don't fit very well into the granularity of the context that they're trying to operate. I play way too many mobile games that are 20 minutes long and exhaust the battery life of my phone, making it non-functional. I play way too many console games that require me to spend 2 hours on my couch to play it, which means I don't. So these are fundamental things that we're going to have to fix, and I think the console business is going to work on it. Flexibility and price point will help with this, but it won't solve the problem alone. We're not doing this so well. Although I give them a lot of credit for bringing glass to the interface, we have not taken this very seriously, mostly because the people who make console games today care mostly about their hardcore and respond to that hardcore, but they're missing that bigger opportunity. I think the place we're set up to learn the most is in at the right price. And I think that might make a great short-term difference in the launch of the G4, but we're going to have to see better performance on these other ones soon. So here are the 4 compass points that I think are important to understand going forward as we think about platforms. Number 1 is time available equals the platform's context. You can't build the same game for every platform, and nor do your customers want it. In particular, respect the time that's available to that customer on that platform and build around it. We've heard other people say that today. It's not new. Touch screens equals skill friction removal. Generally, what happens are that those change things in fundamental ways. Anybody in here ever hear the story about the research that Nintendo did with the Wiimote? I'll see if I can recount this correctly, and maybe my friend from Nintendo will correct me if I'm wrong. But my understanding is they did a piece of fundamental research where they took an Xbox controller and put it on a table and put a television remote on the same table and invited customers in and asked them to pick them up. And more than half of the people would not even pick up a 14-button controller because it scared the living shit out of them. By comparison, the remote control is a relatively neutral device. They had great confidence. They used it every day. They knew what it could do. There's actually no real difference in buttons. In fact, there are more buttons on the remote control. It's as much about the presentation and the expectation that comes with that presentation as anything else. I think if you ran that same experiment today and you put an iPad on that same table, people would pick that iPad up before you told them even what to do. That device has a charisma. And so if we can really grasp that charisma and take advantage of it, we can invite a whole new audience back to the consoles because they will inherently understand it is actually for them and not just for others. Finally, platform doesn't necessarily mean hardware. In fact, in the long term, Gen 4 may be a software platform by the time it's done as much as a hardware one. And so that's going to be a fundamental change to the way that we think about how to develop console games. Finally, increasingly the first player is also the game maker, and that we need to treat those guys like that, and we're going to have a new relationship with them to be effective. So what's it all mean? When we were at EA, we're thinking about going to Gen 4. We've been thinking about this for about 5 years. Took a little while. But in the last couple of years, we've been serious about it. And we didn't have any more information about what those machines were going to be than anybody else in this room except folks who work for Sony and Microsoft. So what we did was we used the IBM PC as a surrogate, and we did a lot of development of our game engines with an idea of where that's going. I think that you will see the console manufacturers do the same thing with Gen 4. That Gen 4 will increasingly become a surrogate for the development of the platformer overall, to the point where maybe the hardware doesn't even matter as much anymore. So the underlying point there is go buy your Gen 4 today, because it's likely to be the console of your future. And in particular, the platform of the future is likely to be the network software it talks to, not necessarily the piece of hardware that you're running on. That's all I have.